All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer on Carl Jung's foundational concepts of psychological types. If you've ever wondered why two incredibly brilliant people can look at the exact same situation and walk away with entirely different, literally incompatible realities, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're exploring a psychological framework that wasn't just born in a vacuum. It was forged through some serious historic clashes of great minds. We're going to break down exactly how human beings are wired to perceive the world, and as you'll see, we'll discover how these deep psychological divisions have quite literally shaped human history. So to really understand all this, we've got to start with one of the most famous intellectual breakups of all time. Why did the two absolute greatest minds in modern psychology fundamentally disagree? Why did Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, guys who started out as incredibly close colleagues trying to unlock the secrets of the unconscious, eventually find themselves totally at odds? Well, it's a question that goes way beyond just some academic dispute. It actually reveals how our intrinsic view of the world dictates not just our own personal lives, but the very course of human thought itself.
Section 1. Freud versus Jung, the empiricist and the abstractor.
You see, their massive divergence wasn't just a simple difference of opinion. It was an inevitable clash of two completely different psychological types. They honestly couldn't agree because they were fundamentally wired to process reality from opposite directions. On one side, we have Freud. He was the extroverted empiricist. His approach was highly objective. He looked at the human psyche through this lens of observable facts, pathology, and causal reduction. He wanted to trace literally everything back to specific, often biological or infantile causes. But then, on the other side, we have Jung. Jung was the introverted abstractor. He recognized the undeniable absolute power of subjective inner ideas. He figured out that man isn't just some object determined by external facts. Man is a self-creating subject influenced by inherited, universal concepts, which, of course, he called the collective unconscious. So Freud's system just couldn't accommodate this vast inner world, and Jung totally refused to accept a system that reduced the human soul to mere biological mechanisms.
Section 2. The two core mechanisms, the heartbeat of the psyche. Now, to explain these basic mechanisms, Jung actually drew upon the poet Goethe, who famously compared this psychological rhythm to a heartbeat. It's like this vital, biological alternation of energy. So let's look at the first mechanism, the diastolic or outward movement, extroversion. In this state, the external world acts like a giant magnet, literally pulling the subject's interest and energy out toward the object. For the extrovert, the external facts, outer events, and the people around them hold the predominant value. In fact, sometimes the subjects submit so completely to this outward pull that they can actually become alienated from themselves, almost as if their entire purpose is determined by just abandoning themselves to the external world.
Conversely, we have introversion. This is the systolic movement. Here, the energy flows completely away from the object. The inner subject actually becomes the magnetic center of interest. The introverted standpoint gives the subject a much higher value than the object, holding its ground against the overwhelming influence of the external world. So for the introvert, the subjective process is the absolute priority. The outer object usually takes on a secondary importance, sometimes just serving as a mere token or a physical embodiment of an inner idea.
So, take a second and ask yourself, which of these two magnetic poles dictates how you relate to reality? Do you find your energy primarily drawn outward by the people, the objects, and the hard facts around you, or do you feel a much stronger gravitational pull inward towards your own concepts, feelings, and subjective interpretations? Every single human being possesses both mechanisms, sure, but we all naturally favor one, and that establishes our primary psychological attitude.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 4 psychological functions, the basic tools of adaptation.
While extroversion and introversion tell us the direction of our energy, they don't give us the whole picture, right? To actually adapt to the world, Jung identified 4 basic psychological functions. We have thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Every single one of us possesses all 4 of these tools. However, when one of these 4 functions habitually dominates your attitude, when it becomes your primary, go-to way of navigating reality, a specific psychological type is formed. So you might be an introverted thinking type, or maybe an extroverted feeling type, and so on. But relying on just one tool, well, that comes with a pretty profound risk.
Because here is the absolutely crucial point, as Jung so brilliantly observed. Relying entirely on one dominant function throws the psyche completely out of balance. Think about it. If you only experience the world through intellect, you're leaving out a massive chunk of reality. This creates a severe adaptation deficit that just builds and builds over time. And eventually, the unconscious steps in to correct this imbalance, forcing a drastic and sometimes genuinely shocking compensation. The psyche demands wholeness, and it will forcefully erupt to reclaim those unused functions.
Section 4. Types in Ancient History. The Clash of Early Christian Thinkers.
To really see the extreme lengths the human psyche will go to correct this imbalance, we don't just have to look at modern clinical patients. We can actually look all the way back to the 2nd century. Here we have two absolute towering figures of the early Christian era, Tertullian and Origen. They represented diametrically opposed psychological reactions to the intellectualism of Gnosticism, which was a movement that heavily emphasized rational knowledge. Tertullian was this introverted, passionate thinker who aggressively rejected this intellectualism. Origen, on the other hand, was an extroverted, highly tolerant scholar who eagerly absorbed it and synthesized it with Christian thought. But to adapt to their chosen paths, both of these men were forced by their psychological one-sidedness to make some absolutely unbelievable sacrifices.
Just look at what Tertullian did. As an introverted thinker, he possessed a razor-sharp, unmatched intellect. But he realized that this very intellect dangerously bound him to the world and to the rationalism of the Gnostics. So to find balance and tap into his deep inner religious feeling, he performed an intellectual self-mutilation. He executed what's called a sacrificium intellectus, a total sacrifice of the intellect. He famously embraced his faith specifically because it was against reason, asserting the absolute reality of his irrational inner feeling over the logic of the external world. Basically, he amputated his most valuable function just to save his soul. Then, on the flip side, we have Origen. Now, Origen was an extrovert. For him, the danger didn't lie in intellect at all. It lay in his sensuous, feeling-based enchainment to the outer object. To safely embrace his massive intellectual scholarship without falling prey to the severe moral libertinism that sometimes went along with Gnosticism, he went to the most shocking extreme imaginable. He performed the sacrificium folly, literal self-castration. Yeah, he sacrificed his sensual hold on the physical world just so he could freely dedicate himself to objective scholarship. So both men sacrificed their dominant natural tendencies just to force a psychological compensation.
And this fundamental divide between the abstract introvert and the sensuous extrovert wasn't just some historical one-off event. It fueled centuries of intense theological battles. We see the Ebionites fighting for a purely human, historically objective Christ, clashing against the Docetists who were advocating for a purely divine, abstract Christ. In the Arian controversy, great minds clashed over homoousia, which is an abstract conceptual identity, versus homosousia, a much more sensuous, perceptible similarity. Even later, in the 9th century, Scotus Erigena, who was likely an introvert, argued for a rational, abstract commemoration of the Holy Communion. Meanwhile, Radbert Eppertus championed transubstantiation, turning a symbol into a coarse, concrete, sensuous reality that the extroverted masses absolutely craved. When you look closely, history is literally a battleground of psychological types.
Section 5. The goal of individuation, the central coordinating principle.
So, given this historical record of extremes, neuroses, and brutal sacrifices, we really have to ask, how do we find balance? How do we actually solve the problem of our one-sidedness without having to, metaphorically or literally mutilate ourselves? Well, Jung's profound answer is individuation. Think of the psyche as this massive, complex kingdom full of conflicting elements and competing functions. Individuation is the central coordinating principle, kind of analogous to a king or a queen in that kingdom. It is an inner authority that you absolutely must deliberately create out of the unconscious through conscious effort. It's the only thing that stops a single function, whether that's extroverted sensation or introverted thinking, from completely hijacking your life and causing an inevitable, disastrous overcorrection.
And the ultimate aim of individuation is truly empowering. It is to create out of oneself the most significant product of which one is capable, moving far beyond mere biological instinct. It demands that we stop conforming to arbitrary societal formulas. It demands that we stop simply defaulting to our biological or psychological blind spots. Instead, true individuation requires us to submit to the fundamental, totally unique laws of our own individual nature, harmonizing our rich inner world with outer reality.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one crucial, provocative thought to chew on. Are you a prisoner to your psychological type, just blindly following your default mechanisms and risking a harsh rebellion from your unconscious? Or are you doing the incredibly hard, conscious work of true individuation, actively integrating all parts of yourself to create the most significant product you are capable of?
The choice between being a mere mechanism and being a true individual is entirely yours.